Hello and welcome to session four of our event today, and turning the stage over to Frank for Defense at Work.
All right, guys, how you doing? My name is Frank Campinko. I'm the principal director of a small company called Domination Through Automation, and today we're going to talk about defense at work. You've heard a lot about, a lot of really great things about AI, about identity and stuff, and what we're going to kind of focus on here is kind of fundamentally the governance of it all. So that's kind of what our company does, and we're going to tell you some success stories and give you some examples of what not to do, and hopefully talk about what to do. So real quick, a little bit about me. 25 years of Air Force cyber operations, 20 as active duty enlisted, retired as a master sergeant, and then 5 as a contractor, and then we became our own after that. Just I got an extreme amount of experiences in the Air Force. I was able to get like my GAC. If you're ever looking to get a good certificate, GAC is the way to go. GMON and GLSC for whatever the Microsoft one is. Our team at DTA, we really what we wanted to do was make all of our lives easier. So we said, okay, let's sit down and come up with something that can help all of us. It's kind of based. We don't really consider ourselves a cybersecurity company. We consider ourselves a cyber governance company, and you'll kind of see those kind of methodologies. But at the end of the day, really, what we want to do is empower you to be your best. So why does all this matter, right? You've seen a lot of examples that all of my counterparts have done an amazing job of talking about like what to expect in the future, what to expect in the past. And for the most part, here are some stats as to why all this matters. What we can tell you is that what we've learned is that about 90% of the breaches that are human error and about 60% of companies that actually have a cybersecurity breach, they kind of fall after that. They don't make it. So a lot of this is extremely important to all of us. And what do we want? We want to see fewer incidents. We want to see fewer detections. We want to protect us holistically, you and I. And at the end of the day, really, what you're going to see a lot of today is talking about like the humanism of it all and not the technology. Because I truly believe that the technology doesn't really fail us. It's the governance and it's the way we reside, the way we rely on that technology is just kind of doing ourselves an injustice. All right, so the foundation, like know thyself. Earlier, Mr. Hernandez was talking about like asset management, right? What we can tell you is that when we talk to a lot of organizations, almost none of them can produce a list of like, yes, here are all of our assets, here are all of our phones, here are all of our systems, switches, routers. They just can't, and you need to like you cannot fix what you don't know you have. So please, if anything, take that out of this. From our approach, the way we kind of do it is we kind of want to bring everything together. There's a lot of really, really great tools out there, and they're doing a lot of really good things for us. And what we do is we kind of have this mindset of, cool, let's bring it all together so that you're not having to look at, 18 different screens all the time. What that does for us is that it kind of makes it easier from an operator standpoint to make sense of all the data and from an analytics standpoint. And then it brings down the integrity gaps, right? Like it lets you know what you need to focus on. And you kind of see kind of that mentality in action with kind of the tools that we've created. And really the goal with showing you the tools is create your own, like I take a hell of a lot of pride in ours, but it doesn't mean we're not doing anything that you can't do. We just did it. And for you and your organizations, we're not telling you that this is the only way to do them. We just want to show you that it can be done. So, you know, once you kind of know what you have, you need a blueprint and you need to know what you're working off. What that means is you need to know your frameworks, whether it's NIST, CIS, in the military, STIGs is a really big thing. If you don't know what STIGs are, that stands for Security Technical Implementation Guide. And it's, 700 checks that we do on a Windows 11 system to make sure that it's hardened correctly and so that it meets our standard. But whatever you use, pick one and kind of go with it. and then make that your foundation so that you can refer back to it and keep referring back to it. So as you build your policy, you know where you're working off of. Policy is where it all kind of like it starts to come together, right? Strategy meets action. Your frameworks tell you what to do. Policy defines how your organization does it. Now, this is big because, again, when we sit down and talk to a lot of organizations, they cannot answer these questions. When we ask them, how are you doing this? They kind of just look at us and say, it's being done. They don't really know. So, what that does is that kind of like lowers confidence, right? When an operator can't really tell his leadership at the tactical level how to get things done, like what do you think that does to your C suites, right? Or to your commanders? If they don't have confidence in what you're telling them, then they don't have confidence in your program. And not having confidence in your program is almost always a direct result of not having really, really good policy. And this all kind of matters because, like I just said, like having confidence produces accountability and consistency. One of the things that you're going to see me talk about a lot is accountability. I truly, truly believe that human accountability is like vital to making all of this successful. You heard John talk a lot about how if you make them sign this and there's actual repudiation and they're held accountable to what they're signing, it's amazing how people start to read things. And again, those are the concepts that you want. For your policy, you want it to be effective at the lowest level possible. You want the guy answering the help desk, to be able to answer a question and say, no, I cannot do that because I have policy and this policy states it right here that I will not do that. And this policy is signed by my leadership and I'm covered. That should kind of be the mindset. If your leadership is constantly involved in your cyber operations, then you're probably lacking the correct effectiveness within your cyber policy. So kind of have that kind of mindset. So baseline profiles. Anybody who's ever read NIST, CIS, or any like security kind of book or anything, they talk about baselines and how baselines are so important, right? And they're almost everything. But again, almost every organization that we go to does not have baselines. They cannot look at us and say, yes, this configuration has been vetted and this configuration has been approved by these people. And that causes a hell of a lot of chaos because if you don't know what your system's supposed to look like, how are you going to know how it's changed when the time comes? And you need to quickly be able to identify that this system was compromised, and your leadership looks at you and says, well, what did they do? And right now, what the statistics are telling us is that it's taking almost 9 months to find that information out. And a lot of that is because we don't have the data when we need it. We're not looking at, the baseline the way that we should be looking at. We're not comparing what a system's configured like now to what a system was configured like when the baseline was approved. And this is causing a whole lot of problems. So for us, what we did is we kind of sat back and said, okay, how can we help? And what we do is we want to help kind of display kind of this kind of mentality of like, how can we share what we've learned in the DoD and kind of bring it to everybody, right? To the masses. Because ultimately, if every system was secured at a DoD or military grade, all of our systems would be much more secure. And you'll kind of see an example of that. But what we're doing here is kind of just showing you how, like, if I were to take a look at my system and I can say, okay, what is it supposed to look like in comparison to what it does look like? I could go and easily say, okay, for this one system and for this one check, it's like, hey, here are the accounts that are only supposed to be in the administrator group. That's a big check, right? I think everybody would acknowledge from a securities perspective, only certain systems should be in the administrators group. So if I could go in and quickly identify, what, why did this change? Who added this person? And know that, oh, this is what the system's supposed to look like. For us, those are the mindsets that we want to share with you guys. That's the mindset that you guys should have in doing your business. You should know, like, when somebody comes to you, you should be able to say what changed, when did it change, and like who do we need to get a hold of to make those happen. In the military, we call it the kill chain, right? We call it the kill chain, and then kill chain is kind of the same for a human as it is for a vulnerability. You identify it, you assess it, you decide what action you're going to take, go and take that action, and then you verify that that action was successful or not successful. So for us, we see this as like helping you guys with your cyber chain, right? Here you can identify what changed, all that good stuff, and then just kind of move forward and help you make the decisions that you need to make. Because we're not saying that it's the lowest level person that should be making the decision, but what we are saying is that it's the lowest level person that should be able to confidently look at the tactical and strategic leadership levels and say, yes, this is what I know, and this is what I can go take care of. And we have every bit of confidence there are amazing operators out there that once given a target, they will go and destroy that target, whether in the DoD or outside of the DoD. So that's kind of the mindset we're bringing. We also kind of want to kind of take a step back. Like John's always talking about taking a step back, right? And kind of like seeing and realizing the battlefield. So what we did is we sat down and we started talking to leadership. And I want everybody to do this. Everybody should be doing this. You guys need to understand that there are three levels of leadership. There's operational, there's tactical, and then there's strategic. As cyber operators, one of the biggest lessons that I learned was how to communicate to my leadership at those levels. From an operator perspective, the binary of it all, I can sit down with my people and we do great things, right? But from a tactical level, my tactical leadership, they're nowhere near as as technical as we are. So they just kind of want to know this, like, okay, what do we look like? What's my history? Be able to tell those stories, be able to look at them and say, hey, green is in the military. I can't speak for outside of the military, but in the military, all they care about is colors. Green, yellow, red, green, yellow, red. So if you can look at them and say, hey, here's what we've looked like, in the past months, for a certain amount of time, they're only going to look at these colors and be like, okay, green, okay, we were yellow, but we're green again. Start to think in terms of those. As you gain experience, you're gonna learn that you have to speak to specific people in a specific manner and embrace that. Yeah, for yourself, don't, you might get mad and you might get frustrated because you're talking to leadership and they don't understand exactly what you're saying, but try to empathize with them because they're in meetings where there are decisions being made that you won't understand. So try to put yourself in their shoes and try to speak in those terms. When we sat down with C-suite leadership, they, no kidding, like, looked at us, and one of them looked at us and said, Frank, I fly planes. That's all I do. That's all I care about is flying planes. So if you could tell me where we are from a cyber status, because he's ultimately responsible for it, and if you could tell me in colors, I would appreciate that. So when we kind of showed him this kind of mindset, he was like, yes, this is exactly what I've been looking for. So for you and your organizations, try to think like that. Think in their terms. What do they want to see? Trust me, guys, it's going to help you in how money is spent, because what they told us is they sat down and said, I don't spend money on cyber because I do not understand it. So if you could go to them and say, okay, we have this system here, and this system, looks terrible from a vulnerability perspective. And they're like, why does it look so bad? And you're like, it's because it's a Windows 10 system and Windows isn't making updates for it anymore. That is where like they start to sense like, oh, okay, wait a minute. In order to get rid of this red, I have to spend money because it's an old operating system. At that point they start to visualize it, right? They start to understand it. So always kind of have that in the back of your mind of how can I help my leadership help me. Sounds funny, but if you kind of have that mindset and you're kind of like, at the end of the day, what's your goal? Your goal is to get rid of this system and get it to Windows 11. And, it might sound like a lot. I don't even know if it's free anymore. I don't think so. Even if they have to buy a whole brand new system, if you can justify the cost, they're going to be a hell of a lot more willing to spend that money. So start to think in terms like that, because that's really what we all kind of need to do better. Another thing that we kind of like to focus on is there's a lot of eggs, like Mr. Hernandez says, there's a lot of eggs being put in one basket, you know, and we tell people don't do that. Like John always says, like security costs. Security is a business decision. And if you can justify those business decisions, I'm not promising you that they'll make them, but I will promise you that they'll be more inclined to. So for when you're scanning, we always recommend having a third party scanner. So as great as Microsoft Defender is, I'm a Tenable fan, Rapid7. There's a lot of other scanners out there. If you're starting to use AI scanners, I'm not saying don't use them. But what I am saying is create a bridge to make sure that its integrity and its credibility is intact. What I can tell you is that Tenable's been doing this for like ever, so it's kind of like it's in your benefit to kind of use the two for a little so that you can make sure that they're both getting what you need to get. And stop thinking in these silos. Like if you can have if you need to have one tool that just does vulnerability scanning, cool. And if you have another another scanner that does hardening scanning, and you start to justify that and you start to display them in a manner that really, really helps your leadership understand, trust me, guys, they'll be more willing to make decisions that are in your favor. So early detection, like the detection of it all is kind of a big thing, right? Again, like you guys, like I told you guys earlier, what we're noticing, and this is across the board, is that it takes about 9 months from detecting to kind of like understanding what happened. And that should be unacceptable to all of us. What you want to do is you want to start to incorporate and bring together tools. This to me is an amazing example of where AI could really, really help. Because when you look at like my system has 730 security checks that it's done. If I'm ever told, hey, your system's been compromised and changes have been made to your system, as a human being, it would take me kind of a long time, not as long, because you saw how like our tool works where it can tell you exactly what happened. But introducing AI would be an amazing concept because that's where it can tell you, hey, this is what changed. This is like who was added, and this is the steps that I think you should take, right? And it can do that for you like in seconds. And it can also help you focus on those high value targets. So don't be afraid to introduce AI into your cyber governance. But what I can tell you is that, at least for me, I will not speak for everybody. I really don't think AI should be a really, really big part of your cyber governance plan because you should be incorporating how you're going to govern AI into your cyber governance plan. So I don't think you should be using the same tool to govern and the same tool to implement. Those that to me just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I would tell you guys kind of keep those two teams separate, but don't be afraid to leverage each one to complement each other. And when you start to kind of do these things, what I can tell you is that you're a hell of a lot more like in the military we use two terms, effective and efficient. And I take so much pride in how effective and efficient some of our teams were because we kind of started using this mindset. And effectiveness wasn't just that we would take care of all these vulnerabilities. Effectiveness is that we were telling our story. And that's I would tell you guys, make that a key part of how you brief. Tell your story. Your people are doing amazing things. So that you should be able to kind of showcase that. But what tends to happen is, that all the bad things just kind of float to the top. And don't let them. Don't let them. Make sure that, all the good things that you and your team are doing are part of that. How you're transforming, how long it takes to identify what's going on with a system, or how long it took to take care of a system, or how long it takes to make sure that you know Sherry and her team that are doing all this work quarterly, it should be part and it should be in your governance system. So, it shouldn't be an email that, yeah, we did this. No, it should be part of your program that says that, hey, on this day at this time, we did these things. That way, when an audit comes, you're not just showing your security plan, you're actually showing the implementation, the monitoring, and the execution of your security plan, and kind of have those kind of mindsets as you move forward. Uh, John earlier talked about the blast radius, right? Network segmentation. I don't know how many times you said it, John, but you said it quite a few times, and I totally agree with you. Everything should be kind of in its own bucket. And if you kind of do the right asset management and you know your network, it makes it a lot easier to start putting, your machines, your system, your AI agents into the right buckets. So that is a big part of the blast radius, is knowing your networks. As you move forward with identity based, stuff, like when you think about what Sherry was talking about, identity management is not supposed to be easy. And it's supposed to be what it is, which is secure. And security doesn't come without some sort of heartache. So kind of think about those things, because if you do your identity correctly, then once you start to look at your blast radius, you notice that it gets smaller and smaller, because you're just like, oh, I just need to worry about this one system, this one person. This one person has rights to do these things on these systems and is in these security groups. And doing all that correctly just makes your blast radius, and not just your your long-term blast radius, but your short-term blast radius, a hell of a lot more responsive. And you should constantly be looking at your playbooks. Playbooks are a big thing that people do not do, or they're just a piece of paper that reside in your plan. Like John earlier talked about, a CEO calling the help desk and saying, "Hey, dude, I need you to, wire me $25 million." That should be in a playbook. Like, what happens when this scenario comes up? And it should be very easy for that person to kind of look through and kind of follow the playbook and say, hey, he hasn't said this keyword. So I know I'm not supposed to wire the 20, but more importantly, I'm not going to wire the $25 million. I'm going to take these actions. And here's who I'm going to call, and here's when I'm going to call, and here's how I'm going to annotate that. Those things should be part of your everyday plans, and you should randomly check them. Just show up and say, hey, tap some young guy on the shoulder and say, we're going to do this, and then see how her or him and the team respond. Like, make those part of your day to day. What that does is ultimately it helps your containment capabilities, because your containment capabilities are kind of like knowing your network and knowing that there are certain vulnerabilities that exist, but you know that they exist and you kind of know what you're doing about them. In the military, we call them plans of actions and milestones. It's starting. You may have heard it. If you've never heard of it, I would tell you to look into it, because they're kind of a big deal. What they do is they come in and say, "Hey, you have this vulnerability, and you need to tell me what you're going to do about it." And you should have a record of that. And those records should be like, in a sense, the ability to tell your story of what you're going to do for a certain vulnerability, like when they can expect these plans of actions to take place, all your milestones. So you should never ever just install a patch. There should be configuration management and there should be some sort of verification that takes place. And you should be able to showcase like, hey, yeah, this is the plan of action. We're not just going to pull a trigger. Like John says, we're going to take a step back. We're going to come up with a game plan and then we're going to execute. And then that game plan should be able to be viewed from an auditor standpoint. What auditors want to see you guys doing is they want to see that this is all kind of being done not in a vacuum and not the week before they show up. So you need to be thinking in terms like, okay, how can we create these kind of records that kind of showcase that we're doing things in a timely manner, and not just in a timely manner, but in organized manner. So always kind of have that in your mind, so always kind of be able to showcase those things as well. Because, like I said, everybody's doing amazingly great work. So the other thing too is policy. Like you've heard it said a lot. Like, but without effective policy, you just got wishful thinking. And every time you have policy, if there are things that need to be done, your policy needs to be measurable, enforceable, and continuously validated. What that means is when Sherry sits down every quarter to meet with the right people to make sure that identity management is going well, policy should state that, hey, once a quarter you're going to do that, and that she's running the show, right? Like these are the metrics that are required. This is the format that it's required to be in, and then put that in your policy. So again, for us, it's about being able to show that you aren't just doing things, but that you have a record, a history of doing these things in the correct way. 'Cause I have every bit of confidence that Sherry's doing it, and I want Sherry to get the credit for doing it continuously, not just once. And that's the other thing, right? For us, compliance is continuous. It's not this point in time oh, the auditor's going to be here next month. Let's get everything done. And then they leave, and certain systems get turned back on because they look terrible. So we've all been there where they just turn them off and then they get turned back on. And that's not where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be able to continuously prove that we're doing the things that our policy and that our leadership believe that we're doing. And to help with that, one of the things that we've done is we're kind of coming up with this new kind of mindset where we take cybersecurity, because what we noticed is when we sat down, there was a lot of confusion, in regards to scoring standards. And if there's confusion in scoring standards and you go to your leadership and they're like, where are we at? And you look at, and, people are looking at them and saying, well, we're good, and they literally answer like that. Then what happens is leadership looks at them and says, well, show me. And then, when you look at CMMC is like 110 checks for level 2. And they're looking at it like, what's our score? Like, where are we at? It just became too much. So what we did is we kind of took the fundamentals of the GOD, and then we said, okay, we're gonna grade everybody on 4 categories. One is vulnerability management. That's if you're patching your systems. 2, configuration management. That's how you're hardening your systems. 3, asset management. That's you knowing your network and all your assets. And then 4, your policy management. And that's how, if you've created not just created your policy, but how you're executing your policy. And then we kind of bring all that together. Those are the kind of concepts that you can introduce into your organization, so that you can start to again tell your story better to your leadership. What that does is it also introduces accountability, right? Because one of the things that we do is we come out and say, okay, this level of person has to sign. Like every year, your cyber policy should be updated and confirmed by your CEO and the policies that state that. And when the time comes, they'll get an email saying, "Hey, you need to do this." And that to us is the governance, right? Now, to help with that, what we did is we took the kill chain and we said, okay, the bad thing about the kill chain is that it starts and ends. Now, for the most part, if you go and take care of a target, it normally doesn't come back. But cyber is different. You could have one system that's completely patched one week, and then the next week it looks like crap. And you, as a cyber operator or a cybersecurity operator, need to acknowledge that. You need to acknowledge that you're going to constantly be looking at your systems over and over again, knowing that one day your system might not be what you thought it was. So what we did is we sat down and said, okay, so what are the steps, right? And first step is assess. You need to be able to look at and make sure that you're scanning your systems. Next step is to analyze. You need to be able to take that, those assessments and say, okay, what does this system look like? You need to be able to do that quickly. And then you need to identify your targets, right? Like I said, this is where AI really, really starts to help out because it can take, those hundreds of thousands of checks and tell you this is the vulnerability you need to take care of. And then you act. You go and you either put a poem in to say, hey, I can't update this system because if I do, it's going to break, the application. And, the CIA triad comes in, and what's more important, availability tends to win out most of the time, but availability with like a poem with accountability. That's kind of how I see it. You're okay. I'm going to leave this system like this because we need a brand new server. So what's the plan to get a brand new server? And then that way everybody's kind of held accountable because once you get to certify kind of gives the lower people the ability to look up top and say, hey man, you said this was okay because we needed new servers and it's going to be a year till we get new servers. And that's kind of the mindset that we want people to have, right? And then finally, the recovery, right? Recovery, you heard all of these fine ladies and gents talk about playbooks and tabletops and how important they are. Like you need to be able to sit down and test things, test how you're going to react. If you test enough, then you just start to react. You're there. There's no like, is this the way we're supposed to do this? People just start reacting correctly. One of the biggest things that we see is people spend a lot of money on backup and recovery, and then when we ask them, so when's the last time you restored to a backup? And they don't. And again, it should. But if it was in your policy, once a month we're going to do this, and we're going to be able to show that we're backing up successfully, then leadership starts to kind of like, well, if they might say no at first, but once it becomes policy and policy signed by the right people, you start to notice the execution gets easier and easier and easier. And it just becomes the way it is. It might take a year, maybe, hopefully not two, but at that point, then you'll know, where you stand. So those are kind of like the concepts, guys. When we talk about defense in work, for us in the military, that's kind of how we do business. Like we just don't arbitrarily act. And what we've noticed is that if people were to kind of start to take this mindset, and it's what they want, right? It's what NIST tells us which we should be doing. It's what CIS tells us that we should be doing. We just want to help people kind of bridge the gap to get there. And that's everything for me. And now I would love feedback from any questions. Again, I am not going to sit here, guys, and tell you that it's 100% proof. Like there's no fault in it. I would like to think that, but I know better than that. So I'd love the feedback and questions.
Hey, Frank. I love and I get the poems. I think they're so important because you have to be able to, okay, if you say, we're going to update the system, we're going to, you know, uh, take the system offline. We need a detailed plan. We need to be able to, and it's got to be realistic too, because I've written poems and reviewed poems. And it's just, I mean, I've had difficulty. Like we had enterprise software, and I was the only one submitting poems from the one base. And I'm like, why am I the
Yeah.
only one doing this? But anyway, it just, what you said is that's a great plan that any organization can do because I like how you mentioned CMMC. I'm starting to get involved into that area where They want evidence. You can't just say, "Yeah, we're doing it." Okay, yeah, we have strong account management policies. What are you doing? Like, how do you roll people off? How do you disable accounts? But yeah, because you have to show the evidence. And I
Yeah.
like the way you mentioned that because, and poems are a great way to do it. They really
Yeah.
are.
And it was funny because when
Keeps you on a good
when
trail.
we sat down, we were like, there's so many tools out there that really just want to be the easy button, right? But when you start talking governance isn't easy. It's not supposed to be easy.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we took kind of like a hard right. We're like, no, we're going to focus more on helping people monitor and maintain their governance programs instead of, just pressing the easy button. Because ultimately, it's really not working either, you know.
Yeah. And you don't need another tool, right? Like, how many people try
Yes.
to address procedural issues with tools, whereas I love tools for technical issues. But as you said, a lot of this are procedural issues or the mindset, or just the you have to get in the proper mindset. And I like the way you mentioned continuous. This isn't something you do every 3 years when KPMG comes along for a financial audit, or DISA comes in and they do a red team audit or something like that. You have to maintain this because it's never going to get easier and it's never going to stop.
And it shouldn't, right? If anything, it should get more
Yeah,
stricter.
yeah.
That should be the goal.
And that CVS
Well,
scoring, it's detailed per the company because everyone's scoring is a little bit different depending on your tier applications and also your SLAs.
Yes. Yes. Right. And again, for us, it was like, and we totally acknowledge that those exist. We just want to help companies make those decisions and then see the ramifications of those decisions. Because as you start to look at these, like, I don't know if I showed it, but if you look at the system that's like out of the box, it looks terrible. It's coming in, my system's coming in at a 95%, and I'm still able to do everything that I need to do.
Yeah.
And out of the box, the system's coming in like at a 35%. And that should just be totally unacceptable to everybody, you know.
Definitely. I learned that the hard way with Tenable IO when we had the log4j. We was
No,
not
yeah,
configured properly. Like every day we had to do new scans. We find more vulnerabilities, more vulnerabilities. And I'm like, okay, what's wrong? We had to call
yeah,
Tenable IO to get on the phone to make sure that we don't get any more because every day was a different thing. It took us like maybe like 60, 90 days to do remediation.
yep, yeah. And it's crazy because Linux has this mindset of like when you build a Microsoft system, Microsoft has like one instance of Java, right? Like you can have multiple, but for the most part, you have like one instance. But the way Linux kind of works is each application is its own silo. So each application just kind of generically puts these libraries in, even if they're not using them. And the Log4j was a great example because we would be talking to vendors and we are like, you need to update your stuff because it has the Log4j, vulnerability. And they would literally tell us like, we're not using it. And we're
Right. They
like on
took.
the phone with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If we're on the phone with them, then why is it here? And to me, that's kind of where baselines come in, right? Is if you could go to a vendor and say, "Hey, okay, I'm using your software. Why do you have this?" And again, to nonchalantly tell me on the phone, "Oh yeah, we're not even using it, so we don't care." It's like, wait, what? Like, I care, dude. You know what I mean? I care because it's showing up on a vulnerability report. If you're not using it, it shouldn't even be there. So that's kind of the
Exactly.
concept.
Yeah, that was like a big push. I'm like, if you're not using it, at least go 5 revisions back and then at least get rid of it. If you don't need it, why is it here?
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of the things like our tool does is that we actually, because even with Log4j, Tenable made it really hard to find out exactly where it was. So we kind of took the we kind of took that ingest and just made it a lot simpler. We call it effective. I love Tenable as a scanner. To me, they're probably my favorite scanner. But like, one, you don't want so many people having access to Tenable. And two, you know, what you can do with Tenable from a visual perspective is it's not bad. It's just not like as effective as we wanted it to be. So that's why we kind of modified it.
Does your tool does anything with PCI? Because I know Tenable is great for that as well.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. Like we kind of just started like really what we wanted to do was we wanted to build a framework, where we could say because at the end of the day, what we notice is like a vulnerability is a vulnerability. A configuration is a configuration, but everybody uses a different numbering system and they try to convolute it. So we just said, okay, we're going to build this kind of like framework where people can start to tie everything together. So in essence, we would love to get to the point, right, where you can say you're PCI enabled, and then you can kind of say, okay, how does that compare to like the military standards? Because we kind of believe that what tends to happen is people look at CMMC and they're like, I'm CMMC level 2, so I'm secure. And the reality is that they're not. They're about 80% there. They just
Yeah.
don't know it.
No, I agree because CMFC is heavy on confidentiality. And what if you're in an industry that needs integrity or availability more? And I
Yeah.
like we said, it's a good start. And I like how your company's building a framework because you can customize a framework. That's the beauty of it.
Yes.
I love when people like we're doing RMF. I'm like, it's a framework. How are you using it? And that's when you said your system security plan and your documentation and your policies come in, and who signs them and how often are they getting signed? Because I always use as a rule if it wasn't signed once a year, it was worthless after a year.
Yes, right. Yeah. And what's pretty cool is that we've actually gotten to the point where you can actually build your document, you can actually build your security plan in the system because then we can
Nice,
monitor it, right? Then we
nice.
can monitor it because we felt like again, when we go and talk to companies, we're like, let me see your security plan. It's a Word document or a PDF document
Yeah,
that was
it's
updated, like you
outdated.
said, 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
They're just
Uh-huh.
come on, guys, like we're better than this. So
Yeah.
yeah. So and that's where like just listening to you guys, it's honestly extremely refreshing, and you guys have been like motivating because you guys are the people I want to work with and for, and it's pretty cool that we're actually out there, that these people are actually out there. And it's funny, Felipe, because I think like you're the missing link that cyber didn't realize they needed, the messaging. And I'm telling you, you're a hell of a lot more important than you realize. And hopefully soon we're going to put that to work.
I told her that yesterday. That's so crazy. I said each one teach
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
Well, it
yeah.
was funny. You go to these conferences where there's like 20, 30,000 people, and you talk to so many people. It's like a mirror. You realize things about yourself that you actually never saw before. And one of the things I learned last summer when I was at a Esri, which is another part of my life, the mapping part, and actually where mapping and cybersecurity come together, and John is, government, and Craig as well, is in GeoX. And so that's sort of, and I'm very interested in how AI is being applied in that space. But I realized I am the only person to ever have an internship with a Hollywood talent agency and the U.S. Geological Survey. And
I
someone's
think
like,
that diversity is amazing.
well,
Yeah,
and it's
that's
just
super
interesting
dope.
because you learn different things. Like when I was new to science, but I was welcomed by the science community, and a year after into my internship, I'm presenting to scientists at the at the federal agency level, and then I've been invited to bring that work forward to two different hands-on labs that I'll be doing in April and May, basically on forest fire recovery and how we use GeoAI and deep learning. So I am in all these really different spaces, which brings us to the next session. I can continue this conversation because a little change up from how we did things last year. I get to take the stage and I get to kind of wrap out the speaking slot, and I'm gonna super excited to sort of take this event home and also get all of your feedback as well to really kind of bring it to a closure, because our next session is really focused on, okay, great, we've learned all the problems, we learned on all the things we're not doing. How do we like put this all in action? So if somebody wants a very tactical 90-day plan, like what am I not doing, what I should be doing, how do we put this in operational terms? And and this is actually transitional for me. I think it actually speaks well to the fact that I'm taking the stage with all of you as I officially graduate in May with my third and final master's degree in law, in privacy law,
Congrats.
women's certificate in privacy law and cybersecurity. So I'm credentialed in lots of different things. I've got a GeoEng, I've got a cybersecurity, and I love all these communities. And part of my passion and my goal is to have a lot more conversation. So I have joy in bringing cybersecurity people together at your level to have a conversation together and invite our community in to engage with us. But what you're going to start seeing more of is a lot more cross-industry, intersectional dialogue. So we can be talking to people, women in GIS, and just GIS professionals who have never thought about cybersecurity, but totally should. So anyways, Frank, amazing. Loved it. Great presentation, everybody. Great job so far. And I'm excited to wrap out our day and meet you in the next session. I'm just going to pop that link in the chat. And I'll see you all in the next room.